And we are live.
And you are playing
Don't you
Satisfactory
mean-
still.
Don't you
Did I
mean
not?
we are
Thought I clicked that.
dead?
Did not be satisfactory.
Nope, never mind. You're just chatting. Nope, that's because I opened the stream before you changed it.
Oh, I I didn't recognize the background. I was like, what is that?
I like Dead by Daylight.
Oh man, I love it. I'm just staring at a gray screen that has a 15-second counter in the corner because the ad refuses to skip and refuses to load. Great.
I feel like that's better than actually having to watch an ad.
That's probably true. Or it just doesn't load at all.
And fun news, folks.
Drake
Oh
on
my
is
God.
quick on the draw on that one.
Here we go.
Ah,
There it is.
It's tweeted.
boy.
It's tweeted.
Stoker.
Also, I love Monster Piece. That's a good wordplay. It makes me happy.
For those of you in the chat who don't know what I'm so gleeful about.
You changed your name and profile picture.
I hate this.
Yeah.
I hate this. I mean, I'm laughing too, but I hate it.
I'm actually kicking my feet on the floor right now, y'all.
Oh my goodness. Hello, chat. Welcome to this year's Midnight Society.
I was
The
halfway
season of
expecting-
horror is upon us.
I was halfway
Horrifying.
expecting you, given what was going on, to be like, "Hello, chat. Welcome to this."
The season of horror is upon us, and it is our responsibility, nay, our duty, to share with you the most terrifying things of the internet. As I see a Monster West getting pet very
I was gonna say,
menacingly.
wow, you're looking good there.
what are you telling out at me?
I'll be in my bunk.
Yeah. You're supposed to say coffin.
Okay, fine. I'll be in my coffin. Baby.
All right.
Newspaper.
My name is Jonas, and I go. Blah.
That's uncanny.
Yeah, it is.
So,
isn't
for
it?
those of you who haven't been here before, we've been doing this thing for a couple years now, where we read some creepypastas during the Halloween season to get us all in the mood. And tonight we all have a little something to share with you. So,
Get your spooky blankets ready and get ready for some spooks.
Yeah.
Should we consider introducing the new people for
Yes,
those who don't
introducing
know
new
them?
people.
Yeah, please.
We should do that.
For those of you who don't know Miffix and Rage, they're just super awesome people. You may have heard them a couple times on my Picardo stream or my Twitch streams. They're a husband and wife duo. They're voice actors. They're both incredibly talented. Miffix draws stuff. They do their own Twitch streams, play a lot of D&D, and yeah, I mean, do you guys want to say hi?
Well, shoot. I think that you covered all the bases. Like, thank you. And it's awesome to be here with you guys and read some spooky stuff together.
Yeah.
It's good to be here. Thanks for the introduction there.
I can barely hear you, Rage.
Yeah, you might want to crank it up like +5.
Yeah, let me do that.
I thought it was just being spooky.
Turn it up to 11.
No, Rage just has this incredibly deep voice.
Yeah, he's got this basso profundo thing going. It's attractive.
We hear Undertaker reads.
It makes the ladies and the gentlemen swoon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm beginning to think that the books that I'm looking for simply aren't on this shelf.
Well, Stoker, I think you're going to have some time because we're probably going to go in the order that it's listed right now in Discord. So,
Are we?
Start with GC?
We always start with GC.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And I happen to pick up a story here. I think I'm going to get a joy. It's
Oh boy.
Just- oh boy.
So,
by the way,
JC, can you link yours in the Poketorium?
yeah.
Oh yes, actually, I should do that.
Because I want to double check reading time. 6 minutes. That sounds good. Okay.
Indeed. So for the approval of the Midnight Society, GC introduces you to Ghost Train. The house I grew up in was right next to a set of busy railroad tracks. From my bedroom window, I could watch the trains roll by. There were three types of trains that used those tracks and still do to this day. They were the long, lumbering freight trains pulling boxcars, flatbeds, and tankers, which I would try and count as they clattered by. Then there were the fast-moving commute trains of the Metropolitan Area Transit Authorities, a.k.a. the MATA, or VM, as some people call it, and Amtrak passenger trains that would breeze by heading to and from the center station in the heart of the city. Now, when most people see trains, they just see big machines rolling down rivets of steel, but me, I saw trains as symbols of freedom and a way out of the hood. Whenever I saw a train, I would imagine all the places I was going to and coming from. Naturally, my favorite toys as a tyke were my Thomas the Tank Engine toys, and I had all the characters, Thomas, Percy, Gordon, James, Toby, Daisy, all of them. When I was 10, my grandparents bought me a Lionel train set for my birthday. To me, it was the best present ever. It consisted of a steam engine and 4 passenger cars. There was even a small bottle of drops you put in the smokestack that allowed the engine to make smoke. I'd spent hours watching that toy train run around in an oval, pretending it was real and that I was driving the locomotive through forests, past fields, across mountains, and past small towns. I eventually developed other interests, namely girls, but I still never lost my interest in trains. I got older. I applied for a job as an engineer trainee on MATA and got it. For me, it was a dream come true. After I took the required classroom courses and exams, I soon found myself riding the cab of a sleek diesel engine that pulled commuter trains. Now, the way the training program was set up was that they have you ride on the different lines of the system for a few months with a regular engineer, and I'd be with the one line for a few weeks, and then I'd be assigned to another line in order to be familiar with the different routes. The M has 8 routes, all numbered. The main line is line 1, and all the branch lines are line 2, line 3, and so on. I started on line 7, the first few weeks before being moved to line 8. Now, line 8, or the Clovertone line as some people called it, is one of the longest branch lines on the system, second only to line 2, a.k.a. the Miller Sport line. First time I rode on line 8, I was with a veteran engineer named Hank. Now, Hank may have been with the company from the beginning, when the old railroads decided they wanted out of the money-losing commuter services and handed all their locomotives and rolling stock to MATA. We had the night owl service, which starts at 7 p.m. and ends at 5 in the morning. We picked our first passengers at Central Station, and we're soon on our way to Cloverton. As we were going down the track, Hank turned to me and said, "There is something you should know if you're going to be working for this railroad, especially if they decide to put you here on line 8 once they make you an official engineer." I looked at him, and I said, "Oh, and what's that?" Hank paused to blow the horn for a crossing and said, "The line is haunted." I replied, "Haunted? How is the line haunted?" I looked at Hank as he blew the horn from another crossing. Oh, wait, what's that? Hank looked at me and said, "It supposedly started with a curse. Back in the late 1800s, where one of the old railroad companies was building a line, the company built the line across the edge of an old farm that belonged to a man named Ezra Gray without his permission. Ezra demanded that the railroad remove the tracks from his property and relay them somewhere else, but the railroad refused due to its costing too much time and money to do so. Mr. Gray did try to sue the railroad, but it was unsuccessful. You see, railroads were quite powerful back in those days, and the railroad had a lot of politicians and judges in their pocket. To add insult to injury, Ezra not only had to pay the court costs, but had to pay the railroad as well. For all the money they spent on the legal proceedings, this bankrupted Ezra, and he was forced to sell the farm, minus the small patch of land the tracks were built on. And Ezra Gray vowed to get even on one way or another. When the line later opened up, Ezra stood in the tracks in front of the first train. The engineer tried to stop in time, but Ezra was hit anyway. Before he died, Ezra cursed the mine, saying that it would bring death and sorrow. Ever since then, there were a lot of mishaps and accidents on those tracks, and many people lost their lives. It is believed that some of those who died haunt various spots, and that a few of the trains that crashed over the years came back as ghost trains, still rolling around these very rails we're on now. I looked at Hank as he blew the horn for another crossing. Ever seen any ghosts on this line? I asked. Plenty, he said. I've seen everything from headless trainmen to phantom lights and ghost trains. I didn't believe him at first, but didn't say anything. We eventually came to a curve in the track, and when we came out of it, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Coming at us was the headline of another train. Hank, for God's sakes, man, put the brakes on, I said. Don't you see the other train coming our way? Hank responded, yeah, I see it. Don't worry, we'll be fine. I looked at Hank and screamed, are you crazy? About to die! Hank just pointed straight ahead and said, no, we're not. Get a good look at that train. I did, and that not only did the oncoming train or engine had the shape of one of the older type diesels, like you see in photos, movies and TV shows from the 50s and 60s, but it seemed to be a transparent shadow with a headlight and lighted cab windows. What the I started to say, but then that shadow train hit us. Well, not hit us exactly, more like passed through us. Our whole cab was surrounded by shadows and streaks of light as what looked to be a passenger train passed through, and I swear I saw the pale, wispy figures of people sitting in the seats. Soon it was gone, and the cab of our engine returned to normal. What the hell was that? I exclaimed. Hank turned to me and said, that was one of the ghost trains I was talking about. Well, what's the story with that ghost train? I asked. Hank sighed said, well, it all happened shortly after MATA was established and took over the commuter rail lines. An even inbound train had just crested the long grade we're on right now, when it lost control and ran away. All downhill, before crashing and piling up on the curve at the bottom. Everyone on board was killed, and the cause of the wreck was blamed on the aged equipment MATA was using back then. Heck, with only a few exceptions, most of the engines MATA got from the old railroads were 25 to 30 years old, and about 30% of the coaches were even older. Not long afterwards, the ghost of that train started making appearances on the stretch of tracks, becoming one of several ghost trains that haunted these rails. I looked at him, then out the front window of the engine. What about the people back of the cars? Do you think they just saw what we saw? I asked. Paige just shrugged and said, probably, but I'm sure most of them are just used to it, so I wouldn't worry too much. Our conductor is probably taking care of things right now. We continued on to Cloverton and arrived on time. We made runs back and forth all night, and several times I saw some of the scary things that Hank told me about. I was relieved when we finally tied up in the yard, leaving the coaches on one of the side tracks and put the engine in the roundhouse. In the next few nights, however, hell. Every night, I had at least a few creepy encounters along Line 8 and all of them with Hank, who just shrugged them off as if they were nothing. But I guess after nearly 40 years, none of the ghosts bothered him anymore. After a few days, I was put on the day runs, which was a relief to me, and didn't have to worry about seeing the ghost trains or headless trainmen again. I eventually became a regular engineer and was put on the main line run. I'm pretty content, but if the big wigs for the M ever decide to put me on the line 8 night hour service again, I'll quit.
Very good. Thank you for that, GC.
Whoops, had my...
Plot twist, yes.
Yeah, I was muted too, because that's what I do.
That's how she works.
All right.
Who is
All right, then.
next?
Jonas, would you like to take it away?
Yes, I would.
Please, far away. Far, far away from here.
All right. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, this is a story called Mr. Widemouth. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to the various homes we had lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless, chasing after another boy in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float on the creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were made just yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring, but in my heart, I know that they are real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine, population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and they served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body, his head, his eyes, his crooked ears. But his mouth was by far the largest. "You look kind of like a Furby," I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look.
Furby? What's a Furby?
He asked. I shrugged. "You know, the toy, the little robot with the big ears. You can pet and feed them almost like a real pet."
Oh,
Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity.
you don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend.
I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check in on me.
I lay under your bed.
He later explained.
I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore.
We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The 3rd or 4th morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face.
I have a new game we can play, he said. We have to wait until after your mother comes in to check on you, because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game.
After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand.
We have to go to see the room at the end of this hallway, he said.
I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth just persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the ground below. We were on the 2nd story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle the drop was farther than 2 stories due to the incline.
I like to play pretend up here, Mr. Widemouth explained. I pretend that there is a big soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try.
I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. "It's a long drop," I said.
But that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop. If it were that way, you may as well just bounce on a real trampoline.
I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through the thin air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. "Maybe some other time," I said. "I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt." Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment.
"If you say so,"
he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box.
"I want to teach you how to juggle," he said. "Here are some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons."
I looked in the box. It was full of knives. "My parents will kill me," I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. "I'll be spanked and grounded for a year." Mr. Widemouth frowned.
It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it.
I pushed the box away. I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air. Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night, saying he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so much fun to play with anymore. My mother came to me one morning and told me I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined in my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me.
I have something I want you to see,
He said. I must have given him a weird look, because then he said,
It's safe. I promise.
I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail which ran through the woods behind the house.
This is an important path, he explained. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day, I hope to take you there.
I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond that trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit, despite what he said otherwise. For that reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it back to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still. Early enough for you? He asked. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. This is the last move, son, I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends. I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house burned down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me. But I felt like Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed that many of the tombstones belonged to children.
Well, I don't know why the kid didn't trust Mr. Widemouth with that super trustworthy voice of his.
That super trustworthy Greystone.
I could have gone a number of ways with that, but I wanted
Wanted something that sounded like a little overzealous.
Jonas, what Mr. Widemouth, like, what if he, like, got into beers?
See, the first thing that came to my mind was a tiny little creepy, just a teeny little thing. I'm your friend, trust me. But then I thought, no, you know what?
He's got a giant mouth, so he's got to be this.
Anyway. All right.
Thank you for that, Jonas.
No problem.
Now, Miffix, it's time for you to
Alright.
share your first story. Do you know how to introduce these?
How do we introduce these? Tell me.
I would like you to say, for the approval of the Midnight Society, I submit, and then you may begin.
All right. For the approval of the Midnight Society, I would like to present Would You Like to Feed the Birds? I had always loved this one cemetery ever since I was a little girl. Not only were the grounds beautiful, but the cemetery itself was absolutely massive. I always imagined it as a fantasy world or a gateway to a totally different dimension, where the souls of the departed could spend their time before moving on to the next life. The one thing that I loved most, however, were the birds. Back then, my father and I would go there to birdwatch from time to time, just to catch a glimpse of them, in this gorgeous habitat. I even had my own set of binoculars with the name Evelyn taped to them. "Why are there always so many birds here, Daddy?" I remember asking. "Well, Evie," my father answered, "it's because of all the trees." I know this wasn't the real reason, but I'm sure my father figured this would be enough to satisfy an 8-year-old. "Is that it?" I asked, unconvinced. My father laughed and stopped to think. "Actually, there might be another reason," he said with a smile. "There's a man that lives here called the groundskeeper. It's his job to make sure the cemetery looks nice for everyone that comes to visit, including the birds." This answer made my imagination start to run wild. I would come up with little stories of how the groundskeeper, a man I never met, would go about his day. I pictured an old man strolling through the cemetery with a shining smile, watering flowers and feeding the birds. As I got older, I began to spend less time in the cemetery, and my stories about the groundskeeper were pushed to the back of my mind. This was, of course, until the day I actually saw him. It was 2 days after my 13th birthday, and my parents were driving me to school. We stopped at a red light right in front of the cemetery, and I proceeded to look out the window. I smiled, remembering the days that I spent there back when I was little. My smile quickly faded when I noticed a man sitting under one of the trees. His shaggy gray hair covered his face, and he was wearing a very dirty-looking peacoat. As the car began to move again, I looked out the back window to see if I could make out anything else before he was out of sight. Nothing. I was about to turn away when something caught my attention. I jerked my head back and saw a flock of birds gather at the man's feet. "Hey, who's that in the cemetery?" I asked my parents. My father was driving, so he told my mother to take a look. My mother turned her head to look out the passenger window, but too late. "Oh, I didn't see them, sweetie," my mom replied. "But the cemetery's closed right now, Evie. There shouldn't be anyone in there." "It's probably the groundskeeper," my father said. "I'm sure he's just getting ready to open up soon." I didn't say anything. I hadn't thought about the groundskeeper in years, but I did remember how I envisioned him, and this person was nothing like what I had imagined. My grandfather died from a heart attack about a month after I graduated from college. He never had any health issues, and even the doctors found it to be a freak occurrence. However, these things can happen, and my grandfather was able to live his life to the fullest, even at the age of 90. Only a few close friends and family came to his funeral. My grandfather never liked large crowds, so we found this to be rather appropriate. We arrived at the cemetery around 4 that day. It was a beautiful fall afternoon, sunny, not too chilly. I stood next to my parents, holding their hands as we listened to the priest, and as he spoke, my eyes started to wander. I was drinking in the fall colors when I noticed a dark figure sitting on a bench under a tree only a couple of yards away. It looked like a man, but I couldn't tell, and my eyes remained fixed on him through the service. When it was finally time for us to leave, the man was still there. "Dad," I whispered, turning to my father, "do we know that guy?" My dad looked over to the man sitting under the tree, and a couple birds flew in and landed at the man's feet. "I don't know him," my dad answered. "He's probably just another visitor or someone that works here." "Like the groundskeeper?" I asked. My dad looked at me a little surprised. "Well, I guess he could be," my dad said, looking back up at the man. "Looks like he's got away with the birds." I looked back over to him. There were now well over a dozen birds surrounding him. Some perched in the tree, some at his feet, and even sat next to him on the bench. Out of pure curiosity, I decided to go over and speak with the stranger. Since my family was close by, I wasn't too worried about anything bad happening. "Excuse me," I said as I approached the man. "Do you work here?" The man looked up at me. He was wearing a dark peacoat and had messy silver hair. He was young, probably in his mid to late 20s, but his complexion was off. His skin was a ghostly white, and it looked like he hadn't slept in days.
"I do,"
he said. His voice was deep, and not at all what I was expecting. At that moment, an eerie silence fell over us. The birds had stopped chirping, and even the slightest breeze had seemed to disappear completely. "Oh, okay, I was just curious," I replied, trying my best not to sound uncomfortable. "Well, nice to meet you. Have a good day. I turned around and started walking back towards my family. I could feel several sets of eyes on me as I walked back and began quickening my pace. This man frightened me, but I didn't know why. I've been around sick people before, some that looked a lot worse than he did, and I never had a problem with any of them. I've also never been afraid of birds or any animals for that matter. Even still, at that moment I could feel what I can only describe as a sense of impending doom. A few days later, I headed over to my grandfather's house to pick up a few of his belongings. All of the items that were packed away in boxes would be temporarily housed at my apartment while my family figured out what to do with them. After I loaded the last box in my car, I decided to do one final sweep of the house to make sure I didn't miss anything. I looked through the kitchen cabinets, every shelf in the living room, but I couldn't find anything. My family was always very thorough when it came to cleaning, so I wasn't really surprised. My last stop was the bedroom. I went through the closet, all of the drawers, and came to the conclusion, well, empty as well. And I was about to leave when a thought crossed my mind. The bed. I knelt down and lifted up the old duvet cover. The light from the window reflected off a small object that was pushed against the wall. I reached under the bed and pulled out a small journal. There's no way I'm leaving this behind, I said to myself. I helped the small leather-bound book closed and left the house. That night, I had a strange dream. I dreamt I was a little kid again, and I was running through the cemetery. I remember sitting under a tree, humming a tune, and watching the branches sway in the wind. Suddenly, the sky grew cloudy and the wind began to pick up. The leaves on the trees turned brown and fell off the branches. When the last of the leaves had gone, I heard a deep voice from behind me.
A lovely day, isn't it, Evelyn?
I turned around and saw a man with shaggy gray hair and a dirty pea coat. The man never looked at me, but instead fixed his eyes on a flock of birds headed in our direction. In my dream, I knew who this man was. "You're the groundskeeper, aren't you?" I said, as calmly as I could. The man nodded, his gaze still held by the flock of birds that was now at our feet.
I am.
He replied. He knelt down beside me and handed me a small paper bag.
Would you like to feed the birds?
I woke up. I wasn't sure if the dream had scared me or not, but it definitely left me feeling uncomfortable. I turned on my light, sat up, and stared at the corner of my room. The boxes from my grandfather's house were all neatly stacked next to my dresser, and the journal I'd found laid perfectly on top. I got out of bed, walked over to the stack of boxes, and picked up the journal. To this day, I'm not sure what made me want to read. Perhaps my imagination had been sparked, and curiosity. Either way, as I went through, there really wasn't a lot to it, mainly sketches of plants, birds, and some text to go along with them. My son is taking Evelyn to the cemetery again today. It warms my heart to know how much she loves that place. This brought a tear to my eye. I was always close with my grandfather, and I almost forgot that he used to be an avid birdwatcher himself. I turned the page and something fell to the ground. I picked it up and noticed it was an old Polaroid photo of me, my dad, and my grandfather. Upon examining it closer, however, I noticed another figure in the background. Holding the Polaroid in one hand, I read what my grandfather had wrote on the next page. "A beautiful day. A shame we didn't notice the young man sitting back there." I turned the page. I had another talk with the groundskeeper today. I think that guy likes birds even more than I do. I started to feel uneasy. This sounded a lot like the man I met the other day. I turned the page again, only this time it was blank, so I kept turning until I stopped at the next page covered in text. "I saw the man again tonight. This time he was outside my bedroom window before he disappeared. There's no doubt about it anymore. It's him." I started to get frightened. My grandfather had never mentioned anything about seeing people. Why would he keep something like this from us? I continued reading. "It's clear to me now. He won't leave me alone until I give myself up. I'm opening the window. I'll be food for the birds soon." I closed the journal. I had no idea what I just read, nor did I want to. I placed the journal on my nightstand and called my parents. A few weeks passed after I showed the journal to my folks. They thought it was odd and said they would look into things, but told me not to worry too much about it. Well, that was easier said than done, but I tried my best. Since I didn't have a job lined up, I'd been actively searching for something since my college graduation. But one morning, I decided to check some of the local job postings to see if there's anything new. I pulled up the website, began scrolling, and one caught my eye. It was an assistant groundskeeper position at the cemetery. Nothing written other than apply in person. It didn't pay much, but it was enough that would allow me to keep my apartment and pay my bills. On top of that, I would be able to hang around the cemetery I'd loved since I was a kid. But most intriguing and most appealing of all was the fact that I would likely be working with that strange man, the groundskeeper, the one I believe my grandfather wrote about. I could have let this go, maybe should have let this go, but I feel as though I need answers. I followed the instructions and applied the following week, and today is my first day. And that concludes Would You Like to Feed the Birds?
I was gonna say, is that the end of it?
That's the end of it. It's like, it feels like it leaves on a cliffhanger.
So I had no idea. I was not prepared that you were going to have Rage do the voice of the dude.
That was pretty cool.
And that really, really adds to the story, let me tell you.
Yes! Oh, I'm so tickled.
Nice.
Very good, very good. Alright, I guess it's my turn.
Yes.
I don't know. Is it Miller? Yeah.
For the approval of the Meta Society, I would like to submit My Daughter is Scared of the Monster in Her Closet. She Should Be. By MikeJesus. Past the blurring light of the hallway, I could only see her silhouette. There's a monster in my closet, she said. My wife was more awake than me. She started to get out of bed. No, my daughter said. You don't go, Mommy. Daddy is braver. Peter, you hear that? Apparently you're braver, my wife mumbled as she slid back into the covers. I am, I said. The girl took after her mother with the overactive imagination. This wasn't the first time my daughter had woken us up in the middle of the night with abstract fears, and I feared it wouldn't be the last. As I dug my slippers out from beneath the bed, I convinced myself that with a bit of rational thinking, I could put an end to these 2 a.m. wake-ups. It's the squiggle again, she whispered, dangling her legs from the bed. The squiggle was just another in a long list of creatures that would hide in my daughter's closet. There were goblins, there were bears, and after a fumbled explanation of world politics, Osama bin Laden shared that closet space for about a month. That night, it was the squiggle. She kept on looking at the closet door, expecting me to open it like I always did. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down next to her on the bed. Can you describe the squiggle to me, Annie? I said. She looked back at the closet, as if she were asking it for permission to speak. It doesn't feel real, she finally whispered. Well, Annie, that's because it's like spaghetti, but with eyes, and it's on fire. Her eyes were filling up with tears again. It doesn't feel real. It's like a drawing that no one should ever draw. It doesn't feel real. Annie, have you ever considered the squiggle doesn't feel real because it isn't actually real? What does consider mean? She asked, wiping her tears. It's when you think about something really hard. It's when you think about something you thought was true. You think about it really hard, and you realize it's not true. The thoughts of the closet drifted from her face. She was no longer a scared child. She was a young mind trying to make sense of the world. Do you ever consider things? Yes, I said, all the time. And does it help? When I was about your age, your grandfather used to take me to the lake every weekend. One time, while we were out swimming, he told me that there was an angry octopus that lived inside the lake that ate little boys. I got so scared, I refused to get back in the water. Was there an octopus? No, your grandfather was just playing a trick on me. There was never any octopus in the lake, but I didn't believe that. The octopus felt real to me. After hearing my grandfather's story, I was sure I would feel the octopus in the water. I was sure he was there. But then you considered that he wasn't there, my daughter said thoughtfully. There was awe in her voice, as if I had revealed some grand cosmic secret to her. You considered, and you weren't scared anymore. A bit of the summer breeze drifted in through the open window. My daughter no longer seemed scared. I felt like a good dad. You want to consider that maybe the squiggle is just a figment of your imagination? What's a figment? It doesn't matter. Just consider that there is no monster in your closet. Okay. She shut her eyes in concentration. For a moment she struggled with her thoughts, but then her eyes opened. She smiled. Thank you, Daddy, she said. Outside the sky was a chaotic smattering of stars. Somewhere off in the distance a police siren crawled into the night. I was the only one looking at the closet. Not scared anymore? I asked. No, I considered the squiggle might not be real, and now I'm not scared. Great, I said and got up. Good night, Annie. Good night, Daddy. She pulled her unicorn covers over herself and shut her eyes. I looked at the closet. It was covered with cartoon horse stickers that had fused themselves into the wood. The closet would forever remain covered in ponies. It perplexed me how anyone could be scared of such a harmless piece of furniture. Hey, Annie, I said, eyeing the closet handle. Want me to check inside the closet? She sat up in bed, confused. Why? There's nothing there. Another rush of pride went through my lungs. The talk had gone better than expected. For old time's sake, I said. She laughed at me as if I was ridiculous for suggesting that something might be in the closet, but she sat up in bed to get a better view. I grabbed the handle and prepared to swing the door open in a theatrical fashion, but I couldn't. I was positive that there was something in the closet. I knew that the squiggle was just a product of my daughter's imagination. I even found the idea of spaghetti with eyes with me to be a bit funny. Yet somewhere deep within me a primal fear bubbled. I was consciously aware that the closet was empty, but there was doubt in my heart. Daddy, she said, are you scared? No, I said, I'm not scared. I pulled open the door and defiantly stared into the abyss of tiny dresses and coats. For a brief moment, my chest calmed. For a brief moment, my rational mind took control and chastised me for being overly dramatic. But then, in the darkness of the clothes, I saw movement. I saw it. I saw that blasphemous monstrosity which confounded my entire perception of the universe. I saw that horrid nightmare pride from the depths of God's fever dreams. I saw the squiggle. The visage of the corroded flesh stole the blood from my face. Its sickly eyes stared deep into my soul. My knees became weak. I couldn't stand in the same world that this monstrosity existed in. The unyielding pressure of an incoming fate pushed my body off balance. Before the curtains of reality came down, I remembered swaying towards the closet. My face became intimately familiar with one of the cartoon horse stickers my daughter had attached to the furniture. With a dull wooden thud, I lost consciousness. I awoke to the sensation of frozen peas pressed against my forehead. The lights were on. I was on the couch in the living room. Next to me sat my wife, one hand on the makeshift ice pack, the other gripped around her phone. Should I call an ambulance? She asked. No, I said, no, I'm fine. You're shaking. I was. The afterimage of the horror was still bouncing around my skull. The unexplainable madness that I had witnessed was still sending twitches through my shivering muscles. I'm fine, I repeated. What happened? My mouth felt like it was full of battery acid. There were no words that explained the ghastly fiend that I had seen hiding in my daughter's closet. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pray. I wanted to beg the heavens for some sort of an explanation to the cruel images that were seared into my mind. I fell, I finally said. I'm fine. Are you sure? Yes. She lifted the frozen peas off my forehead. Doesn't look like you'll need stitches. Good, I said. I wasn't there. I wasn't sitting on my couch being tended to by my wife. I was somewhere else. I was standing stark naked before a cruel world I never knew existed. A horrible blizzard of incomprehensible shapes was freezing my bones. I was a frail worm face with the Goliath of the abyss. I was nothing in a world that meant me harm. It suddenly passed the fear, past the soul-shattering features of the abomination, something recognizable took hold. A familiar worry grasped my being. I sat up on the couch. Where's Annie? Sleeping, my wife said. I came as soon as I heard the crash. The blood from your cut scared her for a bit, but she was tuckered out enough to fall asleep. I got up and moved straight towards my daughter's bedroom. My fear of that horrid creature had not passed, and with every step towards the room, my jaw clenched tighter and tighter, while my legs carried me regardless. I needed to make sure my child was safe. She was lying in bed, deep in her dreams. The unicorn covers were pulled over her face. Her closet was shut. Are you coming back to bed? My wife's touch made me flinch. I couldn't keep my eyes off the closet. There was a dark spot where my forehead met the furniture. I'm gonna clean up the blood, I said. Don't wait up. Are you sure you're fine? Yes, I lied. The damp cloth from the kitchen didn't make a difference. It was too late. My blood had soaked into the cartoon horse sticker. A red splotch would be a permanent feature of my daughter's closet. It would always remind me of what I had seen. I considered whether the creature that I had seen could have been a byproduct of lack of sleep, but the thought refused to take hold. The body of the creature had managed to seem impossible and unavoidably real in the same stroke. I knew that I could not sleep unless I convinced myself the horror had never been real to begin with. With my mind turning faint again, I touched the handle of the closet. My vision was starting to blur. A familiar sound of static started to buzz around my ears. But I didn't let go of the closet door. I needed to confront reality. I needed to believe that the squiggle wasn't real. The empty closet did not lighten my heart. It simply reminded me of what I saw. It simply made the memory of that burning bush of flesh and eyes shine brighter. The squiggle ran away. She looked at me from her unicorn bed. There was a calmness in her voice, which suggested the hell spawn we had both witnessed wasn't a thing worth worrying about. You saw it? You saw that? That thing? She nodded her head. After you hit your head in the closet, it crawled over you and jumped out the window. Crawled over me, I yelled, louder than I should have. I could hear my wife switch on the nightlamp in the bedroom. Yes, my daughter replied casually. The squiggle went over your tummy and out of the window. It's okay. It's not real. The thought of those wet strands of flesh crawling over my body made me feel incurably violated. My abdomen was no longer my own. It belonged to that horrible nightmare. But you saw it. Yes. And you're not scared. No, she said, smiling. I considered whether the squiggle was real, and now I'm brave like you. I wanted to grab her and tell her that she should be scared. I wanted to tell her that what she saw, what we both saw, was something that should inspire wails and despair. But her innocent smile made me turn away. Her fragile mind had made peace with the squiggle. I was the only one being haunted. Good night, Annie, I said, closing her window and locking it. Good night, Daddy, she replied, descending back into her blanket. My wife was standing in the doorway of the bedroom, concerned. I told her I couldn't go back to sleep. I told her that I needed to be alone. I told her that I was going to watch some television. The screen was tuned to the static of a dead channel. The ashtray is full and the bottle half empty. We live in a universe that means us harm. We live in a godless world where unearthly abominations hide in little girls' closets. Regardless of how much I drink or how hard I try to rationalize, I cannot convince myself otherwise. All of the windows of the house are shut and locked, but I can hear the birds starting to sing outside. A new day is starting, but I am unable to face it. I cannot carry on knowing that thing is somewhere out there crawling through the grass. I drink more, praying that the liquor will help me forget. I drink more, desperately hoping that I'll be able to convince myself that the abomination was a trick of the eye. I drink more, knowing it won't help. Finito.
Nice.
Dang. I guess you could say when he looked into that closet, he saw a real creepypasta.
Oh.
You can't see me, but I got the finger guns going.
I could feel it. I could feel your finger.
I can hear the finger guns.
Pew pew, wonk wonk.
All right, so who's next on the hit parade?
I believe it is Rage.
Rage time.
All right.
If you would like to serenade us with your story.
I don't know about serenade, but we can do that anyway. All right. For the Midnight Society, I present The Screaming in the Woods. At 3 a.m., I was awoken to an ear-piercing scream coming from the woods. Waking my husband, I asked him to listen to the sound. It persisted for several minutes. It sounds like a mountain lion. It's probably trying to lure me into some bait. No one screams like that for that long. Try to go back to sleep. It'll stop soon. He rolled over and went back to sleep. Eventually, the screaming did stop. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was going on. Eventually, I did find sleep again. The next morning, we went out to the lake. The cabin we stayed at was something we both decided was a great place to spend our honeymoon. I thought, with both of us being shut-in kind of people, that 2 weeks in the woods by ourselves would be heaven. It's nice so far, but the alleged mountain lion is distressing, to say the least. How late did the wildlife keep you up? My husband, Thomas, asked, no doubt looking for bags under my eyes. It didn't last long, but it made me pretty uncomfortable. Do you think it left? Most likely. My guess is it was probably marking territory. Cats tend to get pretty pissy when other animals get in their turf. As long as we stay away from the foothills at night, we should be fine. After finishing up our chat about last night, we ended up talking about nothing for a couple of hours. Honestly, it was pretty nice. However, I can't stop myself from staring off into the woods. I think I was looking for something, but honestly, I can't be certain of what I hoped to see. Time passed and the air grew cold as the sun dipped closer to the horizon. Thomas hugged me from behind and spoke into my ear. Let's get some food in us and turn in for the night. I've got something for you that might like. When we got inside, he presented me with a small box and a red gift wrapping paper, topped with a small bow. I asked dramatically, "It's a rectangle. My favorite. Babe, you always know just what to get me." He laughed and responded smoothly. You joke now, but that very well may be your favorite rectangle you'll ever have. My interest piqued. I quickly tore away the wrapping paper to find inside a mint-condition copy of an original printing Lovecraft book. Oh my god, how did you find this? This has to be nearly 100 years old. Can I even read it without the spine falling apart? Some rich asshole died and had a library that could rival one in downtown Seattle. I may or may not have been friends with a relative of his during the college days. Said relative hated the guy, and I could get raid the library because he knew we'd love to read. So he let me check it out. So you're saying that's a genuine article. Should be okay to read. You're the best. We kissed and made dinner. A few hours passed and I'm finding myself having trouble attempting to sleep. Maybe I was waiting for it to happen again. Or maybe I was too excited to read my new book. Taking the latter option into account, I opened it up and turned on the small bedside lamp. Thankfully, my husband sleeps like a rock, so I didn't have to worry about him waking up as I delved into a story written by a madman. However, as soon as I was no less than 10 pages in, it started again. There was a blood-curdling scream, as if someone's bones were being shattered. I listened intently and tried my darndest to convince myself it was just some cougar stating territory. After what seemed like an eternity, it finally stopped. I only noticed I was standing at the window. When I looked down, I could see my hands shaking violently. Whatever's out there, everything in my body is telling me that it's dangerous. I didn't sleep that night. And when the sun rose, I hadn't moved an inch in probably hours. I didn't want to move as any evidence I was here could put me in danger. Tom eventually woke up. Did you sleep at all? He asked. I shook my head. He kept pushing. Did you hear the mountain lions again? was closer this time. I don't know how much, but I don't like it. I understand. Look, we've got the whole week booked, and I'd hate to cut the honeymoon short, so I'll tell you what. We enjoy today, and if you hear it again tonight, we'll call the ranger station, and they'll be down within minutes. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Of course, as much as I love any reason to go somewhere, your comfort matters more. Plus, I also really don't like predator cats. They can be real nasty customers. I don't want to be near, especially if you're right about it getting closer. We switched topics and started talking about other things. Eventually, we got dressed and had breakfast. Out of the things we did to enjoy our time, I still couldn't stop thinking about the screaming. I needed to know what it was. I was convinced that it had to be something else. As time passed, I stared into the forest, almost daring something to happen, but I realized that all I was doing was wasting the happiest week of my life for a nuisance that can be ignored with a set of earplugs. As the sun set over the foothills, I let my racing thoughts slow into a more relaxed state. I'm really glad I came here, even if I have to deal with that stupid... Hey, honey, what do you think of the book so far? Tom asked me, breaking from my train of thought. It's fantastic. I love it. We talked more about it, and eventually we were late. We tried to sleep, but again, I found myself waiting for what I knew I was going to hear. Like clockwork, it began again. A blood-curdling scream rang out, and I left the bed. I knew it wasn't some animal. It couldn't be. I threw on some clothes and grabbed the emergency rifle over the fireplace, placed by the owners in case the wildlife got too close. I'm gonna find whatever this thing is, and make sure it doesn't bother me again. I took a flashlight and made my way into the woods. Making sure I was going the right way, I followed the screams deeper in. Nothing in this world could have prepared me for the source. It stood about 10 feet away. Almost a man, but too tall. It was nearly 8 feet tall and had long arms that touched the ground. The stark white leathery skin encased this grotesque creature as I slowly scanned up. The hollow eyes stared directly into my soul as it bent back. When the thing's enormous hands were placed on the ground behind it for support, its chest opened up into a giant gaping mouth that let out the same screams I had been hearing for the past nights. I ran all the way back to the cabin, not stopping for a second. When I got inside, I flipped on the lights, shook my husband violently. May, what? What's going on? I didn't even give him time to think as I started grabbing clothes and shoving them into a bag. Get in the car. What? Now! I admit, I didn't feel bad for screaming, but I knew it would never raise my voice like that unless it was life or death scenario. He stopped asking questions and just threw on a pair of pants as he worked his way to the door. I grabbed the book, my keys, and made my way to the car. As soon as I was in, I peeled out nearly as fast as the car could handle. So are you going to tell me why we didn't call the ranger and you're just currently breaking every speed law in the country? Tom finally asked, because I sincerely doubt that ranger would know what to do with whatever I saw. Wait, you went out there? Why? Because I knew something wasn't there and it was not an animal. And I was right. I'm going to pretend you aren't scaring the ever-living crap out of me and instead move on to my next question. What about our stuff? We can go back in the morning, but right now we're going someplace safe. The rest of the drive was silent as I looked for a hotel. When we found one, I quickly checked in. Nearly as soon as my head touched the pillow, I fell asleep from pure exhaustion. When we drove back in the morning, Tom decided to press again. So you gotta tell me what you saw out there? Would you even believe me? Honestly, I don't know, but it would be nice to at least have some idea of why you practically tried to kill us on the drive away. Just imagine if Slender Man was a streaker. I beg your pardon? We shared a laugh. My nerves finally settled a little bit. Unfortunately, it was short-lived because as soon as we pulled in, all of my fears were vindicated. The door to the cabin was ripped off the hinges. Blinds were torn all down, and everything inside was ransacked. I stayed still and silent as the creature from the night before could be seen tearing the cabin apart from the inside. Tom whispered, "Is that it?" "Yeah. I'm gonna drive away very slowly. In 5 minutes, I want you to call the ranger station and tell them a bear got in." He nodded, silently agreeing. As I backed up slowly, I thanked my lucky stars driveway was made of dirt and not gravel. Several minutes passed, and I made my way back up the path, driving significantly slower than last night. The call was made, and the rangers said they'd check out the area and call us when it's safe. An hour passed, and we got the all clear. When we made it, one man in the group came out to greet us. "Good to see you two. The bear seems to have left, but weirdly enough, it didn't take any food. Not common, but definitely got lucky. Seems like it was having a bad day. How come you two were out here or not here when it came?" I was quick to respond. "We were on a hike. We thought we would have been fine not to lock up, but I guess we were wrong. You guys gave us the all clear, though. Any idea why something came out?" "If it can control the animals, we wouldn't need to work here, unfortunately. They can be just as unpredictable." He said it was certainty, but I could tell he was a little confused himself. After we finished talking and got the clear to grab our things and go. After we called the owners, they gave us a refund eventually. Not wanting to waste the rest of our week, we elected to stay at the hotel and get a bunch of junk food. The rest of the day was much more relaxing, knowing that the previous night's scary encounter was gone, and we got out okay. 4 hours later, I lost all hope, as I was awakened to the most blood-curdling scream I had ever heard. "Tom!" I cried out quietly. A hand under the covers grabbed mine. "I hear it too." And that is it.
Oh fuck, it's a gooker!
I was gonna say, I picked that specifically because I knew you would say it's a gooker. My side notes for it literally said 7 minutes long, gooker.
I didn't read that story. I almost thought you were South Steak for a moment.
No, otherwise I'd hide from it under a cardboard box.
Cardboard box.
You how you doing there, Miller? You doing all right there, Miller? You okay?
Trying to read creepypastas, but the clap of my ass cheeks keeps alerting the chat.
Stoker, get out.
Colonel, I tried to take down the googer, but the clap of my ass cheeks just keeps alerting it to where I'm at.
Amazing.
Metal Gear.
Oh, man.
Well,
All right. Next up is Rick.
Yes.
that's right. It's Richard's turn.
Faster disaster. Rick Griffin, let's go.
Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. Untitled Mysa Krakun story by Gre7g Luterman. Ambassador Krykasir groaned and opened his eyes on the third attempt. "Ambassador?" squeaked a tiny voice in the Mysa language. "Are you finally awake?" The ambassador groaned again and closed his eyes. "Councilman Fleep." "Yes, sir, it's me," she squeaked. "I've been restless, and we thought perhaps you were going to wake, so I've stayed close." Breathing hurt. Everything hurt. He let the air leak out of his snout before drawing another breath. "Oh, groggy. Did you drug me?" he asked, finally opening his eyes once more. "Oh, yes, sir," squeaked the tiny Mysa. "Never seen so much birch murk used in all my life. You completely wiped out our stocks." "What in the... Oh, be thankful we have." Krysakir groaned as he tried to get up. "No, no, no!" Sorry, that's wrong. "No, no, no," beat the councilman. You could feel her running frantically all over his face. "Don't get up! Please don't get up!" Frankly, the Krakun was thankful to not have to try. He felt like he weighed as much as a collapsed star, and burning up just as hot, too. "What? Why?" he moaned. "Well, 3 good reasons," she peeped as she scrambled onto his cheek. "First, we've assembled a medical tent over you. You'll shred it if you get up. Secondly, we don't want you to tear your stitches, and finally, our doctors are still working on you. If you crushed one of them, they'd walk off the job and leave you to die." "Doctors?" Krysakir gasped. "No, no, no! You have to get me back to my ship!" "Sir? We haven't taken you anywhere," said the Mysa. She knelt down on his cheek and stroked his scales in a pathetic attempt to soothe him. We just built the tent around you. Without moving his head, he looked around at the bleached canvas over him and the grass under his head. The ambassador growled, bringing the tiny Mysa up onto all fours. I need to get back to my ship. There's a radio. No, sir, you don't understand, pleaded Fleet. Your ship, all we found are bits and pieces scattered everywhere. She sat back down and gestured wide with her paws to indicate an explosion. Krakun groaned. When he didn't speak, she said, We thought we'd find the same of you, just bits here and there, but there was a huge pile of foam peeling away, and you were in the middle of it. Yeah, the supplemental suspension system, said Krakun. You must have hit awful hard to set that off. What happened? I don't really know, sir, said Fleep. We took off, there was a bang, and a moment later, there was all this smoke. Your ship didn't get far before it came back down. He stared at her a moment. Okay, I need to know everything the doctors have done. Fleet moved closer. Sir? Shouldn't they be coming for you? She asked. They're expecting you home that same day, right? Shouldn't they have flown back down here to find out what happened to you? They can't, sighed the Krakun. You see, that was the only shuttle aboard our ship, and the ship itself was built in space. It's not designed to land on a planet. Now I need to know. So, you're stuck here? Asked the Mysa, scooting closer to his eye. No, he groaned. Eventually, they'll go back and get another shuttle. How long will that take? He stared at her a long while. Not that he needed time to think. He knew the answer, but mostly he needed to get back in control of his frustration. The ambassador wasn't accustomed to being questioned by anyone other than his boss. About a month. A month? She squeaked in alarm. She stood and backed away. How long have I been out? He asked. 3 days, she said as she began pacing across his face. I assembled the doctors as quickly as I could, and they've been working in shifts. Leap, he said. I need a radio, a device for communicating over long distances. You have... She was already shaking her head. I have telegraphs, but none of the wires lead up to your ship. Of course not, grumbled Krakun. Sir, the Mysa said, it's really important that we talk about your health. Yes, I'm sure, he said, rolling his eyes. And now is the part where you told me that you've saved my life and that I owe you, but I assure you that our negotiations... No, sir, Leap squeaked. I wish I could say that we've saved your life. He stared at her, the heart in his throat beating a little faster than the one in his chest. What? She paced in silence a little longer. Well, from the way the doctors have described it, it would be unfair to say that they've saved your life. Perhaps that they're busy saving your life, he suggested. Although it's still early. When I speak to them, the best they can offer is that they haven't let you die just yet. What? He gasped even louder. Please, sir, you have to lay still. They're still working. The Krakun closed his eyes. He drew and released a slow breath. I need you to speak to one of the doctors. I need to speak to one of the doctors. Who's in charge here? They're all too frightened to talk to you, and they don't understand your language, explained the Mysa. So they've briefed me on your situation so I could explain it to you. Another pause. Very well, he said. Explain. Well, said Fleep. They said you have a lot of bleeding wounds, that bits of metal have gone through your body, some went in one side and came out the other, and some are still lodged inside you. Shrapnel, he said for her. Yes, well, these wounds are very big, and they bled a lot, said the Mysa. The doctors are amazed that you didn't die. If you were to scale such injuries down to Mysa size, they would surely be fatal for any of us. Yes, well, you can't live to 12,000 years unless you're very hard to kill, he reminded her. What have they done? Fleep's ears drooped. Are you certain you wouldn't rather rest? No, tell me now. He watched her swallow. Well, I hired a team of spelunkers. Spelunkers? She closed her eyes for several moments before explaining. Cave explorers, sir. When his eyes went wide, she said, They've ventured inside your wounds and secured the shrapnel with ropes. You're right, I don't think I want to hear this. His empty stomach roiled. Mysa were crawling inside his wounds? How much more disgusting could this get? He knelt down and stared at her paws for many moments. Fine, he grumbled. Get it over with. Who is removing the shrapnel? Fleep looked up with a frown. Everyone, she said. Just long lines of Mysa who've come down to help out. Ambassador Krakun closed his eyes, wishing he couldn't imagine dozens of Mysa playing tug-of-war with his shrapnel, but he could, in vivid detail. Any broken bones? He asked. Quite possibly, she said. Not something we can easily judge. All right, he said, but you've stopped the bleeding. Most of it, said the councilman. The seamstresses have taught the spelunkers how to sew close the larger wounds. They've been searing the flesh that's just oozing blood. The indignity of Mysa climbing inside my wounds, he groaned. Are they at least washing them out so you don't leave hairs inside of me? Yes, sir, said Fleet. We've gone through 100 liters of alcohol so far. Very well, he sighed. I thank you for... Sir? There's still something more. He stared at the tiny Mysa, but she refused to look up. Yes? It's... your lung, sir. Your right lung. Praxis Gear definitely didn't want to hear this. Bad? She nodded. I'm afraid so, she said. There's a team with wheelbarrows inside your chest right now, removing tissue that can't be saved. He gritted his teeth, but said nothing. We're hoping that some of the lung can still be salvaged, but so far, it looks bad. I know it doesn't sound like it. That's the end of that.
Huh.
Oh, so it's just a fragment.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's usually what Greg does for his stories. Is he writes like a couple hundred words, and then sees if people likes it. If they do, he continues it.
Oh, okay.
I really like that one, but I'm weird.
I mean,
Yeah. No, I'm not saying you're weird. I'm not saying you're weird, Rick. I'm just saying, yeah, I liked it too.
I'm saying is weird. You're weird, Rick.
Or are you weird?
You should be more normal like me.
Right.
Speaking of completely normal things, I kind of struggled to think about what I wanted to read first this time, but I'm pretty sure that Mr. Widemouth, Mr. Big Mouth?
Mr. Widemouth.
Yeah, that one. I'm pretty sure we hit that one a couple of years ago, and I'm like, you know what? I think I haven't read this story again since we first did this. So I'm going to revisit an old favorite creepypasta of mine. So I'm going to go ahead and, as is the custom, paste it in the Poketorium. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. The Basement. Since I was little, I've always lived with my grandmother. My mother divorced while I was very little, but remarried shortly after. Due to their financial situation, my grandmother turned her garage into a place for my mom and husband to stay in until they could get on their feet and get a house. There wasn't enough room for me there, so I kept staying at Grandma's house. My mom and stepdad got their finances in order and eventually bought a new house. I was already attached to the neighborhood and had a few friends, so when I was asked whether I wanted to move with them or not, I chose not to and finished the rest of my schooling living at Grandma's house. I moved out for a while with some acquaintances, but that fell through after about a year. I needed to move again and thought this would be the perfect time to finally live with my mom for a little while and get to know both my mom and stepdad better. Back then, I was just dating my wife and planned on getting married as soon as we were able to save up the cash for our wedding, so it wasn't going to be a very long time. We figured it would be quickest if we stayed living with our parents so we could fund the wedding ourselves without incurring any debt in addition to our school loans. My sister had gone away to college, so I was able to crash in her old room, in the basement. The basement had a really nice setup. You would walk down the open stairway from upstairs, and to your left was a door that led into the basement. To the right was another door that led to the laundry room, with a bathroom, an extra refrigerator, and the door to my room. To the left was the entertainment room and wet bar my stepdad had built. It was a really nice setup with surround sound that I've watched plenty of action movies on when I'd come over to visit in the past. I got my stuff set up on a Friday night, pretty impressed I was able to get it all moved in a single day. I was pretty beat and quickly fell asleep. The next day, roughly the middle to late afternoon, I was coming downstairs to go to my room and play some video games when I stopped at the entry to the basement. I looked left toward the wet bar, where there was an empty space with an old rocking chair. The room was dimly lit by the sunlight pouring in through the basement doorway. The rocking chair didn't move or anything like that, but I just had this eerie feeling that something was over there. I didn't feel as though whatever was there was staring at me. I could just feel a presence in the room. I really didn't like it. I moved through the laundry room and into my room and closed the door. I decided I'm being stupid, played some video games, and forgot all about it. It must have been roughly 1 a.m. when I decided to go to bed. My parents typically stayed up until 3 and 4 a.m., so I could still hear them clicking away on their laptops upstairs, playing casual games together into all hours of the night as I headed to the bathroom outside my room to brush my teeth. My mother noted that it can be pretty hard to wake up in the morning with the door to the laundry room and my room shut since the sunlight won't pour in. Knowing this, I'd left the laundry room door open. As I walked past the laundry room door that leads out to the entertainment room, I could feel the presence again. It was definitely more pronounced this time. I could feel the hairs standing up on the back of my neck. I quickly moved into the bathroom and shut the door. I finished up my nightly duty and bolted back to my room, only a few feet away. I shut my bedroom door and contemplated leaving it closed. I really hated not waking up on time in the morning, though, and I know I won't if the room stays permanently dark because the door is blocking any sunlight from coming in. I cracked the door open, not too wide, but wide enough that the sunlight would shine through it in the morning. Turned on my box fan on low and crawled into bed. I've always been kind of paranoid, so I made sure when I set my room up that my bed faced the door, feet pointing toward the same wall so I can look out of the room. I closed my eyes and tried to fall asleep, making sure I was tucked in toward the wall, as far from the door and edge of the bed as possible. After a couple of minutes, I could feel it again. I'm being watched. I cracked my right eye open ever so slightly so I don't look awake, should it be true that I am being watched. My door was open much farther now, almost all the way. Likely this was due to the fan blowing, I thought to myself, but I'm still uneasy. I opened my eyes slowly, watching the darkness slowly shift and flow while my eyes tried to adjust to the inky blackness. I simply could not see through the darkness. I could feel the presence now, the feeling of not just being watched, but someone or something being there was now stronger than ever, just beyond my doorway. I closed my eyes again and tried to remain calm. I'm being stupid, I thought to myself. I've never been scared of the night before. Why would I be now? As I tried to mentally psych myself out so I could get some damn sleep, I felt the presence shift. I kept my eyes shut, for I wished not to know what lay beneath the veil of night. The formless void crept into my room slowly, moving itself across the room, catty-corner to my bed. The presence remained there for a long time. All the while, I dared not move, afraid I would garner more attention from the presence. After what seemed like an eternity, the presence began to shift and move over to other parts of my room, yet never coming any closer to my bed. I pushed myself to ignore whatever I was feeling, and busied my thoughts with video games and what I would be doing the next day. After a short while, I was able to drift into a dreamless slumber. From then on, every night, I could feel this presence watch me from just outside my doorway, always coming in for a time and shifting around my room, never coming close to me. I got used to thinking I was either just acting like a child or the stress of the wedding planning was forcing my mind to play tricks on me. Even though I was convinced of these facts, I never opened my eyes when I felt the presence come in, nor did I sleep without my back facing the wall. This had gone on for roughly 8 months before I simply got tired of it. I was tired of feeling this presence watching me, hating the eerie feeling it gave me. I decided that enough was enough, and even though I was worried I'd sleep too late without sunlight helping to wake me in the morning, I left my door closed for the night. I kept my same sleeping position, back against the wall, just in case. For a few minutes, it seemed like the feeling wouldn't present itself, but shortly after I convinced myself of the fact, I could feel the presence again, just beyond the doorway, waiting in the laundry room. I felt a little more secure in that I knew it couldn't see me anymore, but I still didn't like the fact that I could feel it waiting, lingering in the shadows just outside my door. The next night I decided to not only close my door, but also close the laundry room door that led out to the entertainment room and upstairs. It didn't help much. That night, I could feel the presence lurking in the entertainment room, pacing around the wall and door that separated me from the rest of the basement. It was still unsettling, but the feeling was lessened enough that I was able to sleep much better. I began to shut both doors at night, but this came at a heavy price. I no longer woke up to my alarm on time, sometimes hours late for work. This wouldn't do. So I decided to buy one of those outdoor light timers to turn my standing lamp on across the room at a certain time. This worked for about a week or so, but the timing quickly became off. No matter how many times I set it to the correct time, it would either go off way too early, way too late, or not at all. I decided it was time to just man up, open both doors, and let the sunlight help me wake up again. As soon as I turned my light out, the presence returned. It felt stronger than ever, as if it were infuriated that I shut it out of my room. However, the presence still stayed across the room from my bed, so I just forced myself to fall asleep each night, ignoring the presence lurking in the pitch-black corners of my room. In a fit of rebellion against the presence, I began shutting the doors on weekends when I could afford to accidentally sleep in. Of course, the presence did not enjoy this decision of mine one bit. After a few weeks of shutting the thing out on weekends, the one thing I had hoped would never happen began to occur. The presence began to move closer to my bed. It was a Tuesday night when it first started. It moved ever so slightly from its preferred corner to the middle of the room. For the next few nights, it stayed in the center of the room and stopped roaming the opposite wall. The weekend was pretty peaceful. I didn't even feel it roaming the entertainment room the whole weekend. It was as if the presence scared itself by getting too close. That Sunday night, though, everything changed. As I turned the light out, preparing for the inevitable presence to come waltzing back into my room, it came quicker than it ever has before. It didn't go across the room to its usual spot or to the middle of the room. It came closer than ever before, just my nightstand in between it and myself. I was definitely frightened and couldn't think. All I could do was remain motionless and let the void drink me in, eyes shut tight. After a few minutes, unsure of the actual span of time, the presence moved to the foot of my bed. The presence didn't stay still. I could feel it constantly shifting at the foot of my bed, pacing back and forth. I knew not how I could even attempt to sleep, feeling what seemed like contempt or possibly hatred coming from the foot of my bed. Thankfully, the presence calmed itself and moved back to the center of the room for the rest of the night. I only had to put up with this for another few weeks as my wedding date was approaching fast. I was very much ready to be rid of my parents' home. Whatever is in their basement is becoming too much for me to handle. Over the course of the few weeks leading up to my wedding, the presence would always come quicker and hover near my bed and at the foot of my bed. I slept less, ate less, and was becoming generally unpleasant to be around, with this presence haunting me, compounding with the stress of the wedding. It was my second to last night being at my mother's house when I decided I wanted to know what was coming into my room. I don't know why it never occurred to me before. I dug through some old stuff of mine from when I was a child my mother had lying around in the closet and grabbed a nightlight. I plugged that bastard in over by the corner the presence used to hang out at. Now I'd be able to see, even if it was only a little bit, what was entering my room. I also wondered if it would even enter due to the fact the light was on, but with this nightmare almost over, I was feeling braver than ever. It was about 2 a.m. when I decided to go to sleep, so I plugged the nightlight in and hesitated at opening my door. There was no going back from this. Once I turn my light out, either that presence will rush in or it won't, choosing to shy away from the nightlight. I breathed deeply, opened both doors, and darted for my bed. I, again, hesitated turning my light out. I still had a chance to back out. I didn't have to work the next morning because it was the day before the wedding. I could still close both doors and sleep soundly. I mulled over this thought for a minute or two and ultimately decided that if I didn't do it now, I'd never know. I turned the light out and for the first time kept my eyes open while drawing the covers up around me as close as possible. I couldn't see yet as my eyes had not adjusted to the dim lighting. I could already feel the presence outside my doorway, waiting in the laundry room. My eyes began to cut through the shadows, and I could see the void had a shape. It was squat, sat low to the ground, but I couldn't see a full outline of the thing. I was terrified, never actually fully believing something would actually be there. I didn't budge and just stared at the thing, obscured by the darkness of the laundry room. I couldn't help myself and closed my eyes tight. I debated whether I'd open them or not for a good long while, but I knew for sure I wasn't going to move a muscle. I decided to peek again, and what I saw still chills me to my core to this day. The squat creature I could now see was actually just crouched down with its hands placed on the floor between its feet, sitting in the middle of my room. I looked directly into its wide, unblinking eyes, completely horrified that my mother was crouched on the floor, staring intently at me, her head cocked to the side with a tiny grin on her face. Her curly, dark blonde hair was disheveled and all over the place. Had this been going on for over a year? My mother staring creepily at me while I slept? Did she do this to my sister? Was she possessed? A million questions raced through my mind in the span of seconds, but as quickly as I discovered it had been my mother watching me the entire time, she began to move out of the room. She slowly shifted her hands and feet, keeping them close to the floor, moving sideways to keep staring at me with that insane glare. She paused again at my doorway for the longest minute in my life and then vanished into the darkness of the laundry room. I couldn't feel her creepy stare coming from the laundry room. She must have moved on back to the entertainment room or straight back upstairs. I really hoped it was back upstairs, but I wasn't brave enough to find out yet. If my mom was crazy or something, I'd rather not provoke her. Who knows what she would do in that state of mind? I checked the time on my phone, and it had been over an hour since she left my room, and I'd stopped feeling her presence. I clicked my light on and sat up in bed. I thought, maybe it'd be best to at least check in on her, see if she did make it back to bed. Or not. That's how you die in horror movies, I thought. I could see into the laundry room and knew she wasn't hiding in there, so I thought it best to at least close the doors. She never bothered to open them before. I got up and slowly made my way over to the laundry room door. Not thinking about it, I glanced out into the entertainment room and could see my mother crouched in the same position on the far side of the room by the rocking chair, staring intently at me in the doorway. She kept tilting her head back and forth slowly, never breaking eye contact. I froze, a brand new wave of terror keeping me bolted to the floor. My mother began to shuffle toward me, tilting her head back and forth all the while, her smile now wide and seemingly menacing. I shut the door before she could reach me, ran into my room, and locked the door. I heard a thud as she slammed into the door. Once, twice, 3 times she slammed against the door. I was stricken with fear, gripping onto a pair of wooden nunchucks I'd bought from a flea market when I was younger. I couldn't hit my mother, could I? Either way, it made me feel safer. The thumping on the laundry room door stopped. A minute later, I could hear the creak of the hinges as the door slowly opened. The handle of my door began to turn back and forth, trying to push open the door. I sat up the entire night with the light on, quivering in the corner of my room, watching the door handle twist left and right. Around roughly 6 in the morning, the handle stopped turning. I waited until 9 o'clock, making sure it was daytime out before I unlocked the door and ventured out of the room. I peeked out into the laundry room. She wasn't there. Still gripping my nunchucks, I peeked around the now wide-open door to the entertainment room, and she wasn't there either. I peeked a 3rd time around the corner of the door that leads to the stairwell, and she still wasn't there. I breathed a sigh of relief and walked upstairs to the living room and kitchen area. My mother was sitting in her usual seat at the dining table, eating a bowl of cereal. "Good morning, how'd you sleep?" she asked in her usual chipper tone. "Fine, I guess. Did you get up at all last night?" She finished chewing the wad of cereal in her mouth and swallowed. "No, I didn't get up. Why do you ask?" "Nothing. I just thought I heard something in the laundry room," lying right to her face. What was I supposed to say? Hey, why were you trying to kill me or something last night? And staring at me while I slept every night since I lived here? Oh, okay, it could have just been the house settling. You hear most everything in that basement, she said, shoveling in another mouthful of cereal. Yeah, it was probably nothing, I said, lying again. I let her get back to eating, and I began preparing for a long day ahead, getting everything ready for the wedding Saturday. All day I couldn't shake the feeling of what had happened out of my mind. It wasn't a dream. I mean, I never went to sleep. I didn't have the chance to dream. Nevertheless, I still had one night left in that house and decided I needed a backup plan. I asked my best friend and best man to stay the night with me, using the excuse that I needed help waking up in the morning and staying on task for the wedding. I didn't dare tell him about what had happened with my mother, partly because I didn't want to scare him, and partly because I wasn't sure of it myself. It was just too surreal. We stayed up somewhat late, laughing and joking about the stupid things we did in high school and played video games. He crashed on the floor and I'd forgotten all about last night. I was completely exhausted and crashed into bed. I waited to fall asleep for a while, wondering if my mother was going to make a repeat appearance while my friend was there. She never did. I couldn't feel her presence in the entertainment room either. I fell asleep quickly, assured the presence of my friend was keeping whatever my mother was doing in check. The wedding went off without a hitch. It was the best time of my life. My wife and I drove to Kansas City and stayed for close to a week, having a blast on our honeymoon. I thought nothing of the events that had transpired only a few days before, and had completely forgotten the entire event until it came time to open our wedding gifts. We poured out the box of cards that had been given to us and were slowly making our way through them, making a list of what each person had given for writing thank you notes. I opened the card my mother gave us. It was one of those cards that had a pocket for money. I read the message written on the left of the card and pulled the money out of the pocket. A small slip of folded paper fell to the floor. My wife hadn't noticed, so I picked up and unfolded the note. In the note was scrawled in big, thick, messy letters, "I'll always be with you." I quickly folded the note back up and threw it into the trash pile. My wife didn't need to know, and if I told her the story of what happened, she'd just be frightened of the darkness at night. So I kept the story and what was written in the note to myself. A week later, I woke up in our apartment one night in a cold sweat, my wife sleeping soundly beside me. I was feeling thirsty and got up for a drink of water from the kitchen. I made my way into the kitchen and poured a tall, cold glass. As I drank, I heard something shuffle outside by the front door. I didn't think anything of it. It was probably the neighbor across from me. Then the door handle started to twist. Back and forth the handle moved, squeaking lightly with each turn. I looked out the peephole, but no one was there. I closed the peephole and grabbed the handle to keep it from turning. I could feel the pressure of someone trying to twist the handle back and forth on the other side of the door. After a moment, they stopped trying to turn the handle. I looked out the peephole again and saw my mother, crouched low to the ground, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes, and that same menacing grin.
Mom, you're embarrassing me.
Cheers, Mom.
Stop being creepy.
Jeez!
Exactly.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed that one.
It is.
You do not know how hard it is to find that story, though, because there are a lot of creepypastas that have the basement in their title.
Oh my god, I can imagine.
Anyway, I guess it's back to GC, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed. And rain, oh dears, it's gonna be tears. So, for Swiftly Approved of Midnight Society, it wasn't a reindeer, written by Michael Paige. Christ, I muttered to myself, as the first flakes of snow start to fall. They gathered in fuzzy clumps over the windshield before my wipers cleared them away. I'd been waiting for 20 minutes now in my sister's driveway. Had I chosen to wait inside with her, I'd have been dead by now thanks to her 2 great cats. Cute little devils, but murder to my sinuses. Puffy eyes and a clogged up throat, that's just what I need. Every Christmas our family made the annual trip to my grandparents' cabins tucked away in the woods of Hope, Alaska, and I'd hoped to beat the heavy snowfall that was forecasted. Since my sister's license was suspended from a DUI, here I was, a hostage to time, but my finger tapping anxiously on the steering wheel. When my mother had to ask me to be one to grab my sister, I had honestly dreaded it from the start. It wasn't that we hated one another, we just weren't as close anymore. After decades of constant arguments and bitter disagreements, we became distant and the relationship fizzled. Yes, we were siblings, but it felt more accurate to call us the residue of what siblings once were. Finally, like the gates of Valhalla, her front door opened and out she came. Her white hair was forest green. The last time I'd seen her had been white. The time before that, it was violet. Got everything? I asked, as she chambered her way into the passenger seat. Mm-hmm, she responded, as she adjusted her glasses and stuffed a few bags at the back seat. And just like that, we were off. Hope was about a 30-minute drive, and it didn't take long for the awkward silence to inflate between us. It didn't help that the radio didn't work in my car and the broke auxiliary port made your music sound like it was having a seizure. But by the time we reached the turnoff of Hope Highway, the road was turning into a thick white sheet. Thankfully, on Christmas Eve night, the long stretch to Hope's small community was quick and vacant. The cabin was tucked away in a forest of trees 5 miles off the main road. And as I made the turn, my sister cracked the window, pulled a blunt, and lit it with her lighter. Want a hit? She asked. Snow crunched beneath us. Not while I'm driving. It's a straight path. We're practically there already. She took a drag and blew it out the window. I just want to focus on this, alright? She huffed and pushed up her glasses. If you're that worried, maybe slow down a bit then. There was a jab, a piece of bait to lure me into another fight. But I wasn't going to bite, not this time. She could live with us getting there faster. The drive was almost over, and soon I'll be in a warm living room with my feet up, a spiked eggnog in my hand, and Bobby Helms' jingle bells rock in the air. I could always hear Uncle Jed spouting up off on his crude jokes. Why does Santa Claus have such a big dude? My sister shrieked, jabbing a finger in my side and whipping my mind back against the windshield. The car had just finished winding around the thick trail, and the large body of a reindeer stood in our path, eyes wide open and blank. It didn't move as the high beams found it. Snapped into a panic, I twisted the wheels in a desperate swerve. The car veered greasily to the side in a fine spray of slosh. The reindeer, as known as a caribou, remained still, even as the bumper soared inches from its nose. We came to a crunchy halt off the main path. Jesus, I sighed. Blessed with beef. Did we hit it? No, my sister said, leaning out the care window to check while accelerating another plume of smoke. And I wound the steering wheel back around and pressed on the gas. The wheels shrilled in place, kicking up globs of sheet, but not moving an inch. Perfect, I moaned, and unfolded myself with the seat to check it out. The two front tires were caked in black slush and practically swallowed in a mountain of snow. I kicked at it, trying to clear off the icy debris from the treads and beneath the wheel well, and when that tired me out, I resorted to scraping it off with my fingers. Screw off, pants, I heard my sister calling towards the dark silhouettes of the reindeer, its antlers like garland fingers reaching for treetops. Then she made some sort of startled yip, followed by the "What the fuck?" I looked up in the scrim of the snow, and the reindeer was now staying tall on both of its hind legs. It looked strange, like a silly caricature you'd see in a kid's book, but out there, in the silence of the woods, it was a creepy image. The way vague shapes stood on just two legs held on almost like human-like balance. For whatever reason, I realized it didn't have a tail. Its muscular neck craned to the side and let out a Latin scream, a miserable squeal of metal grinding against metal. My legs were ice sculptures, cemented me into the spot as the shriek quieted to a succession of wet grunts. The reindeer dropped down to its original posture and stomped heavily. Puffs of white vapor and strings of snot vented from its nostrils. I was no hunter, but it didn't take me long to tell when a pissed-off animal was about to charge. I leapt for the driver's seat, pulled the door open, and slammed it shut just as the muffled thud of the hoofs reached me. Antlers scraped the door as its large body practically flew over the patch I had just been standing in. Fast. Very fast. My sister screamed as the large bulk of its fang wound back around and charged again, and this time shattered the headlights and submerged us in the darkness. "Just go already," she said. My sister hollered in my ear. "I'm trying, goddammit," I hissed. The wheels continued to spin helplessly, and we were trapped. The creature charged again, this time nailing the window. A cobweb of cracks bloomed near my sister's head. I searched for anything, literally anything, that I could use as a weapon. I was never really a gun enthusiast, but at that moment I had shaved my head and joined the sketchier monks and meant to have a Glock in my hand right there and then. And after rattling the car once more, the reindeer finally appeared to lose interest and disappear amidst a cluster of trees. Granted, some time to breathe and think, we phoned our dad and told him about the situation. He was going to come down in his pickup and get us unstuck and out this mess. And I looked over to my sister, who was taking a long and steady breath between her fingers. "Are you all right?" I asked. "What do you think?" she grumbled. "I told you to slow down." Another jab. But this time I wasn't going to have it. "You want to be useful?" I yelled. "Get out there and push, no? Then shut the hell up. I don't need it right now." She said nothing else, and neither did I. Returning once again to the pocket of signs that I reached and succumbed to. The sooner Dad's headlights peeked in the distance, the better. Suddenly, she rolled the window down. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Shh." She pursed her lips. "Just listen." Humouring her, I waited, and sure enough, that sound reached me too. The quiet voice of a little girl coming from outside. "Somebody," it whispered. "I'm lost. Please help me. I'm lost." My sister unlocked the door and motioned to it. I grabbed her wrist. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "There's someone out there. Just wait a second." "It's weird, isn't it?" The voice continued to whine, choking behind sobs and pleas for anyone to help her. I didn't like the way it sounded. The same lasting drawl between words, the same weeping sounds, like someone was hitting repeat on a speaker. Something wasn't right. My instincts were hoisting red flags left and right. Then my sister looked at me, and her expression warped into shock. She flung back, pinning both shoulders against the interior. Things that sounded like words bubbled up but didn't quite make it out of her throat. I turned and saw what was looking at me. It had the face of a man surrounded by a mottled fur of a caribou's body. The skin was a muffled brown color, wound tightly around his long skull like old crinkled leather. Snowflakes landed upon its wide, expressionless eyes and melted into the dark membranes of its pupils. It circled the car, bobbling its antlers and fogging up the windows as it peered inside. My heart shook the walls of my throat. I locked eyes with my sister, unable to say anything behind the sheer disbelief. I should have grabbed the phone, snapped a photo, recorded a video, anything. My thoughts were jangled. It then let out the same horrible scream, but I didn't see it turn its lips around open. The sound was coming from its neck. Small, fleshy orifices clapping and open like mouths, were converting to high-pitched shrills of the mimicking cry of a little girl. Help me. I'm lost. Help me. Headlights glazed that area, and my father's pickup came into view, paved its way down the path. The reindeer, or whatever the fuck it was, ran off, vanishing once again in the snow-covered thicket. Nobody believed us. Why would they? If anyone had told me that story, I would have assumed that they were hopping around like some crazy psychedelic. But the reality of what I saw was cold, and it's something I still to this day can't fully swallow. Instead of sleeping that night, my sister and I did some research on the list of the myths of skinwalkers, beings of some sort capable of mimicking voices and disguising themselves as animals to lure people into the woods. After reading other accounts, there wasn't a doubt in my mind that what we witnessed out there that night. Every so often that night, I'd stare out the window and eyed the yards, wondering if I'd see that livery face watching for the tree lines. Neither I or my sister ever made that trip again, much to the frustration of my family. But there was a silver lining. She and I have never been closer.
Oh, it brought them together.
It's a happy, scary story.
What a good little reindeer boyfriend.
You brought them together in fear, the natural state of all you lowly mortals.
The way man should be.
Thank you very much, GC.
All right. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, this is a place where no one dies.
Wait, it's like that one episode of Star Trek where...
All right. As a journalist, I get to travel the country a lot. A part of my job includes a column regarding small-town myths and legends. It's not the most factual part of my work, but I still enjoy it. At least I did until I found a town called Silverwoods. According to my anonymous source, it was a place that hadn't changed since the late 50s, a remnant of a bygone era, suffering from a horrible curse. As the myth would have it, nothing there was allowed to die. Mind you, this was before the time of Google Maps. I had to rely on my source's instruction when searching for the town. I fully expected it to be a prank, but my job was exactly that, to prove or disprove information. I set out on my journey. After a few hours of driving, I pulled onto a well-hidden dirt road. It had been poorly maintained and would take me another 3 hours before I even found a hint of civilization. An old wooden sign. Silverwoods. Turn around now, it read. In the distance, I saw what looked like an old farming community. Just a small town with a few buildings that had partially fallen apart and trucks that had rusted beyond repair. At a first glance, it looked abandoned. I parked my car on the side of the road, ready to call the myth bullshit. Then I heard someone call out. "Why did you come here?" a weak voice said. I turned towards the voice. It belonged to a frail old man, holding himself up with a cane. He was bald, and his teeth had all but fallen out. "Who are you?" he asked. Feeling mildly uncomfortable, I introduced myself. "Why are you here?" I explained that I had been given directions by an anonymous source, and that I was hunting down myths and legends. He sighed. "Ignorance is bliss, but since you're here, I will give you what you came for." Only then did I notice that his leg had broken. He dragged it along as he limped around. The weirdest part was that his skin was covered in scratches, all looking fresh. "Are you all right?" I asked nervously. He ignored the question and simply gestured for me to follow. "Are you alone here?" "No, there are others." On the ground, I noticed what I assumed was a dead bird. Its torso had been ripped open, exposing the organs within. It looked like a cat had attacked it. Yet it tried to move around, alive, despite its grave injuries. "The bird! It's... I tried to get out. The old man glanced over it without batting an eye. "It's not allowed to die. Nothing here is allowed to die," he said. He led me inside an old house. No sooner had I taken a step through the front door before my nose was assaulted by the stench of rotting flesh. There were a dozen people littered around the room in various states of mutilation. Yet they were all breathing. living with impossible injuries. The myth had been proven true, but I couldn't believe it. "We need to call for help," I said as I looked at a guy whose hands had no skin left on them. "It would only make things worse," the old man said. I already had my phone out, ready to dial 911. But out in the middle of nowhere, I didn't have a single bar of signal to help me. "Sit down. Let's talk." In shock at the sight, I couldn't find the words to argue. "You came here to learn the history of Silverwoods, and I'm going to tell you," he said. I sat down and looked at all the suffering people around me. Most of them were too wounded to speak a single word, only letting out groans of agony where they sat. Every single injury looked fresh. It looked like not a single day had passed since acquiring them. "Since our town was founded in 1911, we've been a regular farming community. A small town that hardly ever saw any visitors. Most of us were born and raised here, so on the rare occasion that someone passed through, it was a big deal, a cause for celebration." The man took a pause and glanced at his broken leg. "Then in 1956, a man arrived in Silverwoods. With his fancy clothes and expensive car, he starkly contrasted our modest surroundings. He didn't visit for business, nor did he look to settle down in the region. All he wanted was to spend a year with us. At the end of his visit, he promised us a gift never to be forgotten." As he finished the sentence, I heard faint screams coming from outside. They sounded horribly hoarse and emitted a clear message of agony. "The man never said much. He just observed us as we went about our days, never shying away from lending a helping hand. He was polite, helpful, and within a month we'd already accepted him as part of the community. Still, he always wore that damn suit, and never seemed affected by anything around him. No matter the situation, he was calm and looked in pristine shape." The screams got louder. Amid them I could hear faint begs for mercy. "Then, once a year in Silverwoods had ended, he asked us a simple question." "What was it?" I asked. "Do you want to live forever?" He paused and sighed. The screams in the background felt ever more present, as if they knew I was there. "At first, we laughed at the suggestion. Death wasn't an enemy, but we didn't hold it as a friend either. After a lengthy discussion, it all came down to a vote. I guess the outcome is clear." I stepped over to the window and tried to figure out where the screaming was coming from. I wanted to run, but something deep inside me kept me from doing so. I pitied the people of Silverwoods, and I wanted to help them. "So you'll live forever?" He nodded. "He promised us that our bodies wouldn't age. Alas, without time affecting our bodies, we lost the ability to feel hunger, thirst, and the need for sleep. Our bodies can't be killed by any injuries, disease, nor destruction, but we can also never heal. Every injury we sustain, no matter how minor or severe it is, stays with us until the end of time. That is our curse." "But what about the people screaming?" I asked. He sighed. "It's coming from the barn. That's where we keep the people that wanted out." "Out? What do you mean?" "Some people got the idea that they could elude our curse by destroying their own hearts. Others attempted to crush their heads, but they were all wrong. They can't die. They're not allowed to." "How can I help you? Is there any way to stop this?" I asked. Then he laughed. It wasn't a cheerful laugh, but one filled with malice. "Stop it. We don't want it to stop," he said. 10 years ago, that same man returned to our town. He hadn't aged a day, and still smiled cheerfully as he greeted us. He offered us death, release from our horrific lives." "Why didn't you accept it?" He paused, his smile vanishing from his face. "Because he told us what happens to us after we die, and I can promise you, it's a far darker fate than the one we've been condemned to."
Ooh.
Ooh.
You have to go to Illinois.
I hear is that bad?
Just a little Illinoising.
Ah.
They put shredded cheese on hot dogs in Illinois.
Ooh.
Ew.
Exotic.
Like animals. Sorry. There's a similar creepypasta to that one I read some years ago. I'm gonna have to try to find that one. It's a little bit it's similar, but it's different. Its similarities are very similar, but its differences couldn't be more different.
Anywho, Miffix, you want to go in?
Yeah, I am
You do?
totally ready to go for it. This apparently is one that has been done before, but has been submitted once more. And it is my turn, so for the approval of the Midnight Society, I would like to present and share Tailypo.
Yay!
The story is based on an old folk tale from North America. It's sometimes known as Tailbone or Tailybones. Versions of the story have appeared in Tales for the Midnight Hour and Short and Shivery. There was an old man who lived alone in the middle of the forest. He must have been 6 years old if he was a day, but nobody knew his real name. Most folks just called him Old Jake. He had 3 loyal hunting dogs that kept him company on the long, lonely nights. Their names were Ino, Uno, and Calico. He lived in an old cabin he'd built by himself, way back in the deep, dark woods. It wasn't very big, but it was just enough for him and his dogs. The cabin only had 1 room in it, and that was his bedroom, the living room, the dining room, and his kitchen, too. At the end of the room, there was a nice big open fireplace where he could cook his supper and warm his bones on the cold winter nights. Old Jake loved hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors. He had a little garden where he planted vegetables, and he would go out there every day to hunt for rabbits and fish. During the warm months, there was more than enough food to go around, but in the colder months, it was hard to keep his belly full. One cold winter night, the old man's stomach was grumbling, but there was nothing to eat in the cupboards but a few moldy potatoes. He stoked the fire in the fireplace to keep the cabin warm, and he went to bed. He was just about to fall asleep when he heard something in the room. He opened his eyes just in time to see a shadow creeping across the wall. When he sat up in bed and peered into the darkness, his eyes grew wide in terror. Sitting across the room from him was the weirdest-looking creature he had ever seen. It was short and stubby, with pointed ears and bright yellow eyes that seemed to burn with a strange fire. Its body was covered in thick black fur, and it had big sharp claws and a long thick tail. For a moment, Jake just sat there, frozen in fear. He stared at the hideous creature, and it stared back at him. Then, quick as a flash, he grabbed his hunting knife and lunged at the thing. It sprang up and scurried out the hole it had clawed into the cabin wall. The thing was fast, but so was Jake. A split second before it escaped, he brought his knife down squarely on its big tail and cut it off. The creature let out a horrible screech and disappeared into the night. Old Jake was left there standing with the long, thick tail in one hand and the bloody knife in the other. Jake was about to throw the tail outside when his stomach started rumbling again. He was famished with the hunger, so he took the tail, cleaned it, cooked it, and ate it for his supper. It tasted a bit strange, but there was a lot of it, and it was very chewy. In fact, it kind of tasted like chicken. With his stomach full, Old Jake plugged up the hole in the cabin wall with some old rags and newspapers. Then he got back into bed, tummy full, and drifted off to sleep. He hadn't been asleep very long before he was awakened by a strange noise. It sounded like something trying to scratch its way into the cabin. The old man thought that if he stayed really quiet, it might go away. He could hear it scratch, 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 scratch. But then a strange voice outside hissed, "Tailypo! Tailypo! I want my Tailypo!" He thought he might be imagining things, but then he heard it again.
Tailypo, Tailypo! I want my Tailypo!
Old Jake jumped out of bed, ran to the front door and threw it open. He called out to his dog, "I know you, Calico, get over here!" The dogs came tearing up the cabin and ran around barking and sniffing and snarling, but couldn't find a thing. Jake shrugged his shoulders and went back to bed again. He was just about to drift off when he heard the noise again. This time, the scratching sounded like it was at the window. Whatever it was, it really, really wanted to get in. But the scratching seemed to be on 2 walls at one time. Then he heard the strange voice again, and this time it hissed a little louder.
Tailypo, Tailypo! Where's my Tailypo?
Old Jake, who wasn't one to frighten easily, was getting a bit shaky. This was getting a little weird. So he eased to the window and called, "I know, you know. Calico, come over here and see what this thing is scratching at the house." The 3 dogs bounded up to the porch and they sniffed around and barked and sniffed, but never found anything at all. Jake decided to stay up the rest of the night to protect himself, his dogs, and his little cabin. So he pulled up a chair next to the fireplace, grabbed a blanket from his bed, and settled in for the rest of the wind-chilled wintry night. Sleep soon overtook him, and once again he dozed off. It was almost dawn when Jake woke with a start. The sound of scratching seemed to reverberate from every area in the cabin. Jake frantically searched for his axe, his rifle, something to defend himself with, but he was so frightened he couldn't find anything. The scratching grew louder and louder and louder.
Tailypo, Tailypo! Give me back my Tailypo!
Jake yelled back, "Leave me alone! I ain't got your Tailypo!" Then he called his dogs, but this time, the dogs didn't come. He waited and waited, but still not one dog came running. Jake had never been so scared in his life. He ran to his bed and jumped in. The scratching in the voice grew louder and louder and louder.
Tailypo, Tailypo! Give me back my Tailypo!
Jake yelled back loud as he could, "I ain't got no Tailypo, so why don't you leave me alone and go on about your business? I ain't never hurt nobody or nothing, just leave me alone." The scratching seemed to be inside the house now, and the voice was so loud it was deafening.
Tailypo, Tailypo, you took my Tailypo, now I'm back to get it, give it to me now.
Jake pulled the cover over his head and stayed as quiet as he could, but the scratching was now in his room.
Tailypo, Tailypo, you better give it back!
Jake then felt the thing scratching up the bottom of the bed and onto the cover. Jake eased the cover down to see what was steadily approaching, and then he saw it. Short, stubby creature with pointed ears, fat feet with long claws, and bloodshot red eyes that glowed in the dark. Eyes that seemed to burn straight through Jake. Before he could pull the cover over his head again, the thing pounced on his chest, looked down at him, and said, "You got my Tailypo, and you better give it back to me now." Jake yelled, "I ate it! I ate your Tailypo, it's gone!" And just like that, the thing started to scratch and claw and tear away at poor old Jake, trying to get that Tailypo back. Jake tried to fight back, but it was too strong, and those claws were too sharp. Jake's screams echoed throughout the dark mountains, then stopped, leaving a chilling silence. After a month or two without hearing from old Jake, the townspeople got worried and came looking for him. They hiked up the mountain and through the forest, but when they reached his cabin, they had found it torn to shreds. There was no sign of Jake or his dogs. They searched the woods and called out to them, "Jake, I know, you know, Calico!" But there was no answer. Old Jake and his dogs were never seen again. The townspeople say, if you're alone out there on the night and you listen carefully, you can still hear a strange voice calling on the wind.
Tailypo, Tailypo, now I've got my Tailypo.
Nice.
To shreds, you say?
The shreds!
Maybe
To
can I ask?
shreds, you say?
Can I ask? Make one small request. Can you do the Tailypo voice, but like different?
As if, oh my god.
Tailypo, Tailypo, now I've got my Tailypo.
Nice.
Magnificent. 10 out of 10. Taily out of Taily.
Taily out of Taily. The Taily news.
I'm
That's what we
Trevor
would
Noah,
hear
and
if-
this is the Taily Show.
Beautiful.
Oh, man alive. We do have fun here, don't we?
Yeah.
I sure hope so.
Rick's like, I'm waiting for it. Surely it's going to happen someday.
Oh.
Where's
Nice.
Earth
Oh,
Shining
no.
Kaboom?
I believe it's Miller time.
Yeah, but we are
We wanted-
4 minutes to midnight.
Are we really?
Yes, we
Yes.
are.
Yeah.
Holy
Oh my goodness.
heckin' dang. How time flies when you're tailing and poeing. All right, maybe next time we begin with Miller.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe. Yeah, we'll just
Yeah.
pick up and Miller will start the
That's-
round.
It'll be Miller time
That's
next
the
time.
idea. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us. I would like to call this meeting of the Midnight Society to a close.
All
Pour
right.
pour the water on the fire, go whoosh.
Great job, y'all. That was great.
Sweet dreams.
Good night, everyone.
Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Good night, everybody.
We'll see you tomorrow where it's time for more.
Sorry, I just thought of a really funny SNL skit.
I'm just being me.
Good night,
have-
everybody.
We'll have more creepypastas this next Monday.
Next Monday. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't miss it.
Don't miss it.
Night.
Tempo says, will there be another meeting? We will be doing this every Monday during the month of October, including Hallows Eve. Yay!
Yay.
All right.
All right, have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.